Ita Go Premanandi. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya Stotra Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Abhay Charana Ravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya Stotra Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Gauri Vaishnav Vrind Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की वृंदावन धाम की मथुरा धाम की जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की मायापुर धाम की गंगा माई की यमुना माई की भक्ति देवी की Srila Prabhupada Translation Book Distribution Ki, Srila Prabhupada Translation Prasadam Distribution Ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande. All glory to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glory to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glory to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glory to all Guru, Shri Guru and Shri Guru Namo Shivaya. Hare Krishna. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to this morning's Bhagavatam class. We're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 24, titled Renunciation of Kardama Muni, text 18. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Canto 3, Chapter 24, text 18. Esha manavite garbham pravishta kaitavardhanaha avidya samsaya grantim chitvagam vicharishyati. Esha manavite garbham pravishta kaitavardhanaha avidya samsaya grantim chitvagam vicharishyati. Esha manavite garbham pravishta kaitavardhanaha avidya samsaya grantim chitvagam vicharishyati. Eshaha, the same Supreme Personality of Godhead. Manavi, O daughter of Manu, Te, your, Garbham, womb, Pravishtha, has entered, Kaitaba, Kaitaba Ardhana, the killer of the demon Kaitaba, Avidya of ignorance, Samshaya, and of doubt, Granthim, the knot, Chitva, cutting off, Gam, the world, Vicharishyati, he will travel over. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila Abhay Charnaravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki Lord Brahma then told Devahuti, my dear daughter Manu, the same Supreme Personality of Godhead who killed the demon Kaitava is now within your womb. He will cut off all the knots of your ignorance and doubt. Then he will travel all over the world. Purport. Here the word avidya is very significant. Avidya means forgetfulness of one's identity. Every one of us is a spirit soul, but we have forgotten. We think I'm this body. This is called avidya. Samshaya granthi means doubtfulness. The knot of doubtfulness is tied when the soul identifies with the material world. That knot is called ahankara, the junction of matter and spirit. By proper knowledge received from the scriptures in disciplic succession, and by proper application of that knowledge, one can free himself from this binding combination of matter and spirit. Brahma assures Devahuti that his son will enlighten her, and after enlightening her, he will travel all over the world, distributing the system of Sankhya philosophy. The word samshaya means doubtful knowledge. Speculative and pseudo-yogic knowledge is all doubtful. At the present moment, the so-called yoga system is prosecuted on the understanding that by agitation of the different stations of the bodily construction, one can find that he is God. The mental speculators think similarly, but they are all doubtful. Real knowledge is expounded in Bhagavad Gita. Just become Krishna conscious. Just worship Krishna and become a devotee of Krishna. That is real knowledge. And anyone who follows that system becomes perfect without a doubt. Om Ajnanathimiranthasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Shubhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatirubhascha Kripa Sindhuba Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Canto 3, chapter 24, verse number 18. I'll read the translation again. Lord Brahma then told Devahuti, my dear daughter of Manu, the same Supreme Personality of Godhead who killed the demon Kaitava is now within your womb. He will cut off all knots of your ignorance and doubt. Then he will travel all over the world. So continuing on from yesterday, where in this series of verses, Lord Brahma is speaking to Devahuti and Kardama Muni. And in yesterday's verse, text 17, Lord Brahma tells Devahuti, or can you tell Kardama Muni, by mystic yoga and the practical application of knowledge from the scriptures, Kapila Muni, who is characterized by his golden hair, his eyes just like lotus petals and his lotus feet, which bear the marks of lotus flowers, will uproot the deep-rooted desire for work in this material world. In yesterday's work, Srila Prabhupada in his purport writes, referring to Kapila Dev, he'll present the philosophy of Sankhya in such a way that by studying his philosophy, people will be able to uproot the deep-rooted desire for karma, fruitive activities. Everyone in this material world engages in achieving the fruits of his labor. A man tries to be happy by achieving the fruits of his own honest labor, but actually he becomes more and more entangled. One cannot get out of this entanglement unless he has perfect knowledge or devotional service. And in this verse, the one that we read today, the key point here that there are many such it's carrying on from yesterday's verse, but one of the key points that are mentioned here is the word ahankara. The knot of doubtfulness is tied when the soul identifies with the material world. This knot is called ahankara, the junction of matter and spirit. So towards the end of yesterday's verse is written, Kapila Muni's Sankhya system of philosophy is based on jnana and vijnana. So jnana and vijnana, knowledge and the application of knowledge. So I just sort of reading something from, obviously when you look up Vedabase and just type in ahankara, you get so many hits that you at one point you just stop counting. So in Canto 2, Chapter 5, verse number 25, there's a definition, or one of the definitions of ahankara. This means, I'm just reading from the purport, this means that the false ego in the sum total form of Mahat Tattva is generated from the marginal potency of the Lord, and due to this false ego of lording it over the material creation, ingredients are generated for the false enjoyment of the living being. The living being is practically the dominating factor over the material elements as the enjoyer, though the background is the Supreme Lord. Factually, save and except the Lord, no one can be called the enjoyer, but the living entity falsely desires to become the enjoyer. This is the origin of false ego. So, false ego, basically, as Prabhupada describes it, not only here in other places, is that which binds us to this world. So we need some identity. Obviously, in a constitutional position, we are eternally the servants of Krishna. We are all eternally serving Krishna in the spiritual realm, or that's our truest position. But when we desire to come, or when we desire to enjoy separately off of Krishna, we need an identity. And that identity cannot, we want to enjoy independent of Krishna, so that means we have to be situated in a different realm, which is this material world. But to function in this world, we need an identity, and that identity is provided to us, or that's given to us through this agency of false ego. There's a famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verse number 27. Prakrite kriyamanani gunakarmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudatma kartaham iti manyate. The bewildered soul. I'll just read the translation word for word again. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. So a lot of time that happens to us, not a lot of times, for me, all instances where there's this tendency to just consider myself to be the doer or to actually take credit for everything that I've done. And like most of the occasions, it's for anything that's where I want to enjoy the fruits of my own labor. However, when it comes to things that have gone astray, where things haven't gone as planned, there's always the tendency to blame it on Krishna. You know, when things are going well, no one asks this question, Krishna, why did you give this to me? Rather, it's by the fruits of my own labor, by my own endeavor, has this been made possible. But when things don't go well, then, oh, Krishna, why do you have to put me to this situation or this circumstance? So, in chapter 3 of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes that the soul thinks himself to be the doer. However, in chapter 18, he says that for anything to be successful, for any endeavor to come to its fruition, there are 5 factors of action. The place of action, the body, the performer, which is us, the various senses through which we perform that endeavor, the main different kinds of endeavor, and ultimately the super soul, which is the Daiva. These are the 5 factors of action. So anything that we do, we understand. So, for example, when Krishna says we are not the doers, it doesn't mean, for example, if I'm moving this mic, or if I'm driving if I were to just drive out of the parking lot and just hit someone, and obviously I'll be asked to present an account of what happened. If I just go and tell them, sorry sir, I'm not the doer, I don't think it'll go any further than me being labeled as insane or having some sort of a mental condition. What Krishna describes further, he elaborates further on this in the 18th chapter, is there are 5 factors of action. And so our endeavor is only 1/5 of the entire equation. So when we have that in mind, we at least can understand that there are other factors that are influencing the outcome of our situation. For example, if today we want to go out and, even in a transcendental sense, on a Harinam, if the weather is such that it just isn't allowing us, a lot of times it happens when we're going out in book distribution, when it's raining or when it's pouring in such a way that it's even a risk for us to take out the book and give it to someone, then we understand that some factors are affecting what we are trying to do. So in that sense, it fosters a sense of detachment from the result. And that detachment helps us understand that ultimately everything is Krishna's will in the ultimate sense. It's something that we have to practice. constantly, day in, day out. And like I said, even after, as practicing sadhakas, this comes into picture, you know, like I said, day in and day out. Just recently I was hearing just a short video by Radha Swami, just a 7-minute video on chanting. And a devotee was asking him, now, in this stage, this devotee was referring to himself, I feel like I'm chanting mechanically, but how do I come to that stage of, chanting in the purest state of consciousness as it's described? So, Radha Swami was describing this. This devotee was describing that when I'm chanting, my consciousness is primarily for finishing my rounds. And a lot of times, like I said, even for myself, when I'm chanting, my first focus is to finish my rounds so that I can move on to something else. But if we see the lives of the Goswamis, if we see the lives of devotees who has such a strong namaruchi, taste for the holy name, that when they're chanting, they basically are feeling that intense separation from Krishna. And so Radhanath Maharaj was describing, when we are chanting, what do we pray for? Right? What do we pray for? What's our prayer? When we are chanting, are we chanting in the mood of prayer? What's that prayer? Please engage me in your service. So Maharaj was describing that when we chant and we call out to Krishna, please engage me in your service, and Krishna comes knocking at the door. What do you need? You've asked for service. Oh, Krishna, please let me finish my rounds. That's usually the case that we'll say. And Krishna will be like, okay. So he'll give us that sense of completeness that we want to feel by finishing our rounds. But if we're truly chanting, the heart is the place or where all our desires reside. So what are our desires? If our desires are to truly pray for service, then Krishna will give us that taste and give us more and more of that hankering for service. So when we chant, this is the mood with which we can chant. And Maharaj was saying, we'll finish our rounds, but we'll finish our rounds with that consciousness. For example, Indra Prabhu, there's a famous quote of him where he says, when we get to our last round of chanting the Mahamantra, the holy names, we should chant with that consciousness that this is the last time, this is my last attempt to please the divine couple, to please Srimati Radharani in a way that I'll get to serve her and to serve her associates and to serve the devotees. And when we get to the last Hare, we should be praying with that intense mood of longing to get service. And if you feel that we have not had that opportunity, we didn't get that taste, or we weren't able to chant with that feeling, then we should chant again. Repeatedly chant again. There was a reference here towards the last bit of the purport, where it's written, speculative and pseudo-yogic knowledge is all doubtful. At the present moment, the so-called yoga system is prosecuted on the understanding that by agitation of the different stations of the bodily construction, one can find that he is God. Once my Guru Maharaj when he first met Srila Prabhupada, he said, because he was searching and he had been through in the 1970s, obviously there was an explosion of different gurus and different teachers that were coming to the West. And Maharaj attended a university lecture with Srila Prabhupada, and he asked, there are so many yogis and gurus that are coming, that are out there. How do we know which one to follow? This is a question that everyone has. A lot of times, if I'm going shopping for a cell phone, I would want to know which one is, ideal for me, because I really want to make the best decision. I don't want to be buying something which I'll have to replace in the coming months. So Maharaj asked this to Srila Prabhupada, what's all these yogis and gurus, how do I know which one to choose? And Prabhupada's answer, he said, was so simple, yet so deep. It depends whether you want to serve God or you want to be served. Whether you want to serve God or you want to be served. He said, if you want to be served, which means the opposite of serving God, God is the possessor. He was saying Krishna is God even when he is in the lap of his mother and even when he's performing pastimes in the cities of Dwarka. God doesn't become God through meditation. God is always God. And because God is always God, why will he help? Why will he encourage that competition? Why will he? But at the same time, if you want to serve God through chanting or through following the process that's outlined by Krishna, then he will help you. He will sow the seed in your heart and help you water the seed. So, even for us, when we are practicing Krishna consciousness, when we are actually following the ninefold process of Bhakti, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, and primarily starting with chanting, what is it that we are actually asking for? Are we wanting to serve or to be served? Once I remember, there's this pastime wherein actually Dinabandhu Prabhu just left, but I'd heard it from him. He had said he was glorifying Jayananda Prabhu. You all know Jayananda Prabhu. So he was saying when he was new, I believe he had joined somewhere in LA, but then there was a buzz going around that there's a pure devotee named Jayananda. And he had never seen Jayananda Prabhu. Obviously, in those days, we didn't have WhatsApp or Facebook, of posting, pictures of who this person is. So he was quite intrigued to see who this person is, Jayananda. So he went up to, he was asked to go to the LA temple, or I believe San Francisco temple, to help with the services there, and he was quite excited because now he'll finally get to see this devotee Jayananda. So he enters the temple vicinity, and he sees that there's no one around, and all of a sudden as he's walking past, he just sees a head pop out from the so there was a car, and there was someone under the car, working on the car, and his head just popping out. Hey, Haribol, Prabhu, would you want to give me a hand? And Dinabandhu Prabhu was like, yeah, I'll give you a hand. And then next thing you know, the person comes out and he's fully covered with grease, and his hands are, he's just dressed in such a way that someone would think that, he's probably been working on that car for the last, day or so. And he comes out and he shakes his hand and he says, hey, Prabhu, sorry, you helped me out for the last half an hour. I forgot to ask your name. What's your name? And, Dinabandhu Prabhu says, I'm Dinabandhu Das. And, oh, wonderful. And has this Prabhu was walking past. He's like, Dinabandhu Prabhu stopped him like, Prabhu, what's your name? Oh, sorry, Prabhu, my apologies. Jayananda Das. Oh, like a light bulb moment. Jayananda, he thought a pure devotee will be someone with the perfect tilak, the most cleanest dhoti and kurta levitating, up in the air. Haribol! And he's seeing Jayananda just fully absorbed in service. And he said, it realized to him that this pure devotee is truly devoid of any sort of false ego, in where he's just so absorbed in broadcasting Krishna's glories, in serving Krishna to his or her fullest capacity. Obviously, there are times, we take inspiration from these personalities and we understand that their mood is undivided, unmotivated, ahetuki apratihata, devotional service to the Lord and to their spiritual master. So when we talk of false ego, interestingly, there is in the prayers of Gajendra in the 8th canto, he says, false, so we understand Obviously, in the coming chapters, there'll be an explanation of Sankhya Yoga, where there are these elements of material creation that describe earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. And he's saying that there are different kinds of dissolution that happen. One happens obviously with the dissolution of our own bodies when we change bodies. One happens at the end of Brahma's night. And one happens at the end of Brahma's lifetime. And interestingly, Gajendra says that false ego survives through all of these different phases. So when we leave our body, our subtle body actually carries a consciousness from this body to the next body. And again, like I said, this will be described in the coming chapters. But for a very graphic description of how things, in the second canto, what's described is how things come into existence to the Mahatattva, but in the 12th canto, we'll see how things dissolve, or there's a dissolution of all these material elements into the Mahatattva again. So there's a description of false ego. Once I was listening to a class by His Grace Gauranga Prabhu from Chaupari, and Gauranga Prabhu was saying how Hiranyakashipu had asked for a boon that he shouldn't be pierced by any weapon, shouldn't be killed either in the day or the night, shouldn't be killed either on the in the air or on the earth, not by any human demigod, and not to be killed either inside or outside of the house or whatever vicinity one is in. And Gauranga Prabhu equated that as to be a false ego. A false ego cannot be killed either, or cannot be destroyed either inside or outside the house, or whatever vicinity, neither in the day or at night, not by any weapon, not by any man, human, or demigod. And what was the fifth one? Weapons, not by any weapons. But it can only be destroyed by Krishna's grace, by the grace of his devotee, through the practice of devotional service. So this false ego, like I said, it's something that we are constantly having to deal with. Just this morning, before coming here, there was a nice article by His Holiness Sachinandan Swami on Dandvat, which I'm not able to find, but the topic was titled Digesting a False Ego. So, like I said, even in our practice of bhakti, Krishna will provide us ample opportunities to curb our pride. Once there was a pastime wherein His Holiness Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Giriraj Swami were in Chowpat in Bombay when they had just come to India. And obviously Srila Prabhupada devised this plan of enlisting life members in India wherever he went, because he saw that as a more sustainable medium by which different members will be recruited, and obviously that will expand on the mission in India. So at one such office, Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Giriraj Swami go up to this potential prospective life member, and they obviously make a presentation. This is what ISKCON has done all over the world, and we, for you to become a life member, this is what would be needed, and we'd be very grateful for you to do so. And as Maharaj describes, it was a very, very hot day, extremely hot day, and obviously this is 1970s, so having an air conditioning is a luxury in some places in the offices. So this gentleman whom they were making the presentation to, he said, "Okay, you want me to become a life member?" I said, "Yeah." So he had a cold drink or fizzy drink, whatever you may call it, on his table, and he pointed to Tamal Krishna Maharaj and said, "I will become a life member if I'm able to pour this drink on your head." Maharaj said, "Go ahead." So this gentleman took the drink and just poured it on Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, "How about now?" He said, "Yes, now I'll sign up to be a life member." So obviously, as we know how Tamal Krishna Maharaj, was such a pioneer, and for all the services that he had done, still doing through his disciples and through other mediums uh, in spreading the glory of Srila Prabhupada. For him to not even protest, you know, do you know who I am? To take that humble position, it is what more can be said of us, day in, day out when we go out in book distribution. There are so many instances when people will just rebuke us, just sometimes there'll be, instances where we may run into someone whom we've known and, it can be sort of an awkward situation. And that question may arise in our heart, who am I doing it for? So false ego, purifying of false ego helps when we understand the purpose of what we are doing. And the process of bhakti is actually is meant to help us to get to that stage. Once Guru Kripa Swami, in the early days again, was in India, new to India, and he was, again, trying to go and enlist life members. So one afternoon he went to one of the shops there, and he was trying to present them the Bhagavad Gita and see if they would like to get a copy of the Gita. And it was afternoon time, so these shopkeepers said, the business is slow, and here we are seeing a Western sadhu, shaved head. Why not have, some nice afternoon tea with this? So they said, okay, what do you have? Like, oh, Bhagavad Gita. Oh, okay. What can you tell us from the Bhagavad Gita? And he presents, this is Arjuna, who's presenting himself to be an illusion, and Krishna is actually speaking to him knowledge that will help him come out of illusion. And most importantly, we are all in the same boat as Arjuna is presenting himself to be. So this knowledge is meant to enlighten us. So shopkeeper said, is Arjuna the real hero in the Bhagavad Gita? And Guru Kripa Swami said, yes. Then they started quoting Mahabharata. Actually, Arjuna is not the hero, Karna is the hero. And then they said, okay. And Guru Kripa Swami, they were going back and forth, and, they were presenting Mahabharata, and obviously, at that time, devotees had not, or especially Guru Kripa Swami, had not read the entire Mahabharata. Whatever they had heard was from Srila Prabhupada, whatever that heard was in context to the Gita that Srila Prabhupada was speaking. Finally, after all this going back and forth, Guru Kripa Swami just slammed his fist and said, Arjuna is the hero of the Gita. And the shopkeepers were like, hey, what are you? You're speaking on the Gita? Your guru is Prabhupada. You're chanting Hare Krishna and you're becoming angry? What is this? This is not at all agreed as per what, your teacher is teaching you. And Guru Kripa Swami said, if we were to have had the same conversation 3 years ago, I would have punched you in the face. But today, after these 3 years, to the practice of bhakti, to the mercy of my spiritual master, all I'm doing is just banging my fist. So transformation has happened. So our false ego, Her Grace Devaki Mataji has written a beautiful book, False Ego, a Constant Troublemaker. She was here recently, 3 months ago, and such practical application for us on how to deal with this inner voice within us that's always troubling us, and how to direct it in service to Radha Gopinath. So just ending here where it says speculative and pseudo-yogic knowledge is all doubtful. Like I was reading this book. This book is Reflections on Sacred Teachings, Shikshashtika by Bhaktitirtha Swami. And in this, obviously, the concept of humility and tolerance has been expounded upon. And some devotees were asking Maharaj this question, that, there's so much of this new age stuff today, and they all present, teachings such as be humble, be tolerant, be nice to others. However, this devotee said, I felt Krishna consciousness to be something higher in the sense that I feel that it's more wholesome. I'm just paraphrasing the question. And Mara said, all these New Age philosophies are centered around exploiting God's energies or getting blissed out on God's energies rather than serving God as a person. And if you really see even some religions around the world today or teachings around the world that are centered on personalism, it's all stemming from, again, as I said earlier, Srila Prabhupada's answer to Giriraj Swami was, it all depends whether you want to serve God or become God or be served. If it's the distinction is as clear as that. There are just two buckets. And which bucket you want to be in, actually then, there's further, it can be further more sophisticated into different ideologies and so on and so forth. And in this, I was just reading yesterday, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says from the Shikshashtakam, Na dhanam na janam na sundarim kavitam va jagadisha kamaye mama janmani janmanishvare bhavatad bhakti rahitukitvaye. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. I only want your causeless devotional service, birth after birth. And Mara said this verse would sound very strange to a so-called normal person of this world. What is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saying? I don't want any wealth, which means I don't want to enjoy this world. I don't want any number of followers. That means I don't want anyone to cheer me on. I don't want any beautiful women, or a man, which means I don't want any sense gratification. Like such a person in the normal world today would be considered someone as completely dysfunctional. Someone just having no purpose in life. And he said, the materialists are crazy, but as devotees, we are also crazy. What are we crazy for? Is to serve Radha Gopinath, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, I was listening to it last week, where His Holiness Swami Bhagavan Keshav Maharaj was saying, quoting Bhaktivedanta Swami again, that those that want to live a normal life are accepting the principles and ideologies of an insane world. So, when people tell us, why can't you just be normal? Sorry, it's too late. There's no turning back for us. And Maharaj said we can only be either a happy devotee or a miserable devotee, but we remain a devotee regardless. So, just some things. And like I said, when you type in false ego or hankar on database, at one point you just stop scrolling through the pages because there are so many wonderful room conversations of Srila Prabhupada, morning walks, references to the Bhagavatam. But as Prabhupada always succinctly describes it, it is a junction of matter and spirit, or that which ties us to this world of matter. And that identity which is letting us function in this world is called false ego. There is also a real ego, and the true ego is that we are eternally servants of Krishna. So, I think I've gone over my time. If there's any one question or comment. Yes. Yep. Yep. Travel the world. Yeah. Get her knowledge from? Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 See, when we, yeah. So, good question. Srila Prabhupada said Bhakti Vinod Thakur could have delivered this entire 14 worlds, but he left this little service for me. So Bhakti Vinod Thakur, is it that Bhakti Vinod Thakur didn't do what, if these 14 worlds, and Prabhupada is saying that he left this little service for me. He did it through Srila Prabhupada. He did it, he empowered his son. I mean, he was through the Parampara, Bhakti Vinod Thakur and the Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and then Bhakti, our own Srila Prabhupada. Once Srila Prabhupada himself was asked this question, that Bhakti Vinod Thakur preached primarily, you could say, only in Bengal. He sent some copies of, obviously he sent Teaching Lord Chaitanya to Canada and other countries, but it was primarily in Bengal. And then Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, not only in Bengal, but all over India. And Srila Prabhupada took those teachings outside of India. So they were telling Prabhupada that, in that sense, you are actually much greater than the previous Acharya. Srila Prabhupada said, no, don't say that. It's only through the grace of my spiritual master that I've, whatever little service that I've offered. So, again, when we see the parampara, it continues on, where the service is being, someone is being empowered to do so through the previous Acharya. So similarly here, Devahuti, this is one way of Devahuti's, this is Devahuti's glory, that the Supreme Lord appeared through a womb and is spreading the teaching. So obviously, it's not a person here but in your question of Gyan and Vigyan, we'll see how towards the end of this canto, she achieves perfection. Ultimately, Gyan and Vigyan, what should it lead to? Perfection. And then she attains perfection to the end of this canto. Okay. Yes, Prabhu. Mm-hmm. 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 Yep. Mm-hmm. So the same Supreme Personality of Godhead is referred to the Supreme Personality of Godhead that spoke initially to Kardama Muni a few chapters ago. That appeared to Kardama Muni after performing austerity. So he said that same Supreme Personality of Godhead will appear. So that's what he's referring to, the same Supreme Personality of Godhead. Where, in regards to Hayagriva killing Madhu and Kaitaba, yes, in that sense, I'm not I can't speak on this, but from what I understand, this is again either my speculation from what my limited understanding is, he will cut off the knots of ignorance and doubt. So again, like I said, it could be, maybe I can look this up, but maybe there's some deeper reason or deeper meaning behind the killing of Madhu and Kaitaba, and somehow that's tied to Devahuti in this instance of cutting the knots of ignorance and doubt. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so pride and arrogance, where does it stem from? It stems from of falsely wanting to lord over this material world, right? Because there's pride in the spiritual world as well. There's pride, for example, like I said, once my Guru Maharaj was asked this question to Pradyumna Prabhu, that if everything we see in this material world is a reflection of the spiritual world, Because as we say, right, lust that we see is it's reflected, the true lust, in its completely spiritualized sense exists in the spiritual world. So pride, and he said yes, pride exists in the spiritual world as well. Pride in the material world refers to where I want to be the first, in everything, or I want to be the center of attraction, or center of the universe. Pride in the spiritual world means I being the last. So I having as many masters. Das, das, anudas. So, the further I'm away from from Krishna, in the sense that as many masters as I have to serve, that's the true definition of pride. So pride exists in the spiritual world as well. However, here in the material world, it's covered. It's not covered. It's reflected in a sense of me wanting to be first. But in spiritual world, it's meant to be the last. So ahankara is used, or false ego. There are two things that we need to understand. One is the concept, and one is the function. So we need, for example, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was, I was reading Chaitanya Charan Prabhu's article, where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when he was hearing Gita Govinda, and Amaraji was singing Gita Govinda so beautifully that all of a sudden he wanted to run and embrace, but he was stopped. That you're in your current, as per the Varna and Ashrama, you're basically a sannyasi. So he had to stop himself, because as a function, he's in a body of a sannyasi, so he's meant to follow that Varna and Ashrama. So that's obviously we need to function in this world, and to that we have to take on an identity, and that identity is obviously it gives us, we have to perform our duties, but that's the function. But the concept of it is where I want to enjoy this world independent of Krishna is what is being discouraged, because that's obviously something that's keeping us in this entanglement. Kantraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki, Tagore Premanande, Shri Prabhupada ki.